so much indeed, Amelia, and thank you everybody. Serge Parks, it's really good to see you again, and everybody, colleagues from UN Habitat. I think first, what's interesting in the consultation we just did on the mobile phones is that if you look, we had local service delivery, public health, and community awareness. There were three different options. If you group them together, that is local service delivery all together in a sense. So I think that that's an interesting angle. And then local economic development second in that sense, and then a third would be the social protection. And what I'm going to do in the next just 2 or 3 minutes is first say a couple of words about local government finance as really one of the key solutions to accelerating the response to this crisis, and how that is not structurally seen in the system. And this is a big problem. This is seen as a health crisis, which it is. And as Amelia said earlier on, we are seeing who are the essential workers. You know, we are seeing that transport workers are essential workers, nurses are essential workers, but we are also seeing who are the essential institutions. And whilst it is a health crisis, it has economic implications and hunger implications, social implications, and it is not the health ministry that is the only institution that can solve this crisis. In fact, it's the local governments that are the key institutions in resolving this health crisis. So we're not only seeing who are the key people in our communities and valorizing them a little bit more, we're also seeing who are the key institutions. And I think local governments are key both in terms of the preparedness, in terms of the response, the emergency response, and then in terms of the recovery. And I'm going to address the financing in those three elements: the preparedness, the emergency response, and the recovery, because in each way, the local government financing is a little bit different. Now, there's a guidance note that we've issued, which basically summarizes the three main elements of local government finance. And you know, these have been mentioned so far. There's a link there in the chat box: own source revenue, intergovernmental fiscal transfers, and occasionally asset management, of course, and borrowing and bonds where available. But the key thing is that this response, I think we, in terms of the financing of it, we can break it up into these three areas. First, preparedness. So those local governments that can get ahead of the curve and use their intergovernmental fiscal transfers before it hits, lobby with central government, as the minister from South Africa mentioned, to have more flexibility for use of these funds, maximize the liquidity of your own source revenue, keep that as much as you can, because that's your fully fungible liquid money, reschedule any debts you have if you have them, get in there before the crisis hits, and so you're ready then to provide your whole of local government response that can include social distancing, distribution of masks and things like this. And there's a very large role for local governments. Before it becomes a health issue, it's a community preparedness issue. Schools, everything needs to get ready. And we've seen in some countries where cities have done this in time, they haven't had as big an emergency. There's been a very different rate of response in the different countries where the pandemic has hit. So, and if resources allow, you can start some procurement processes early in the preparedness. So that's the preparedness phase. Now, if it then moves to the emergency response phase, then it's a little bit different. From your intergovernmental fiscal transfers, you need to maximize the lobbying. You need to put the case to central government that local and regional governments are a way of dealing effectively with this crisis. It's very interesting that on April the 17th, the former Minister of Health in Britain publicly admitted to the BBC that they made a huge blunder. They did not rely on their local and regional governments for some of the key preparedness items, and therefore they were not able to prepare. And that was a public admittance. So we should lobby during the crisis that as much as the crisis money is designated locally, manage own source revenues carefully, don't run out of cash. Liquidity is the critical issue in the emergency response phase. Local governments must not run out of cash at all. Very important. Subnational borrowing, of course, you're not going to pay any debts you may have, and maximum coordination with the Ministry of Health. There's a large role, of course, for the Ministry of Health in this phase, in the emergency phase. And of course, it requires the same multi-sector, multi-department, all of local government approach with fast procurement if possible and that kind of thing. And now moving on to the recovery, assuming you've gone through the crisis, you're now moving on to the recovery. Here again, there are two key issues in terms of the local government finances. First, rebuilding the fiscal space. It'll be a new normal. A lot of the regular sources of revenue, sources of own source revenue, such as property taxes from small shops and businesses, local other taxes and fees where they are used. Some local governments, they have a proportion of the sales tax. However it is that local governments are financed, those regular sources are going to be hit hard. Likewise, central government, its intergovernmental fiscal transfers, which is the main source of financing for all local governments, rich or poor, they're also going to be hit hard. So it'll be very important to make sure, as the Minister from South Africa said, that local governments are part of the action when it comes to the recovery, and that the intergovernmental fiscal transfer system is maintained, and that any leeway, any opening with the IMF, etc., to increase fiscal space nationally is shared with the local governments as part of the recovery. But it will also be important to review local taxation. There may be new sectors that need to be taxed. For example, there's a lot of talk about digitization, which is a great way of social distancing, ordering things through Amazon. And these digital service providers and delivery services are making a huge profits out of this crisis right now. And they use local roads, they knock on local doors, they use local infrastructure, but they very rarely pay local taxes. So it'll be important to identify the sectors that are actually growing economically and reorient the tax system to cover those sectors, as protecting those sectors that are not able to pay. So there may need to be a reorganizing of local taxation, as well as making sure that the intergovernmental fiscal transfer system is maintained. But then it's not only about rebuilding local fiscal space, it's also about rebuilding the local economy. And here, with the International Municipal Investment Fund, we're going to look at projects that both have an economic impact, but also contribute to local fiscal space, contribute to local government revenue. So PPPs that not only provide a service, but also contribute to local government revenue will be really important. And also local economic development.
1 minute to wrap up, David.
I'm wrapping up, Amelia, thank you so much. Also, local economic development assessments to identify the catalytic companies and sectors, vocational training, etc., to make sure that the economy can be reignited, protection for those that need it, and which are the key sectors, which are the key areas that need support from the public sector. So I think it's going to be a new word afterwards, but just to summarize, each section, preparedness, emergency response, and recovery is different. The local governments are the main actors in addition with the Ministry of Health, and their financing is the way that countries will escape from this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And David is doing a very interesting blog during this crisis. I would urge you to look for it because it has very, very interesting inputs about how we need to approach this. Different moments, different instruments, different way of looking at it. I think that is extremely important. And in all of those moments and for all of those instruments, a lot of dialogue and dialogue between the different spheres of government, dialogue with the partners, dialogue with the